Hello and welcome to the Sunderland Echoes Raw podcast ahead of the big derby game on Sunday at the Stadium of Light between Sunderland and Newcastle United, joined by James Copley from the Sunderland Echo and Dominic Scurr from the Shields Gazette for all the insight and info from both camps ahead of Sunderland v Newcastle. Welcome both. We're all friends and colleagues at the minute. How are we both doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good. Busy week on all fronts this week. Newcastle have the trip to Leverkusen as well in the Champions League. Contender ahead of the derby game. But we'll get straight into the sort of team news, I guess, from both camps. Sunderland in particular, there was a lot of focus on Siddiqui and Granit Xhaka, looking to avoid the suspension, which they both managed to do so. However, Luke O'Nien will be missing after his red card in the dying seconds of the City defeat at the weekend. He'll now serve a three-game ban. Just kicking off for you, really, James. From the Sunderland point of view, obviously a massive boost to have Siddiqui and Xhaka available. And sort of more generally, how do you see Reggie's options this week?
Yeah, very important to have Xhaka and Siddiqui. Obviously, Siddiqui covers a lot of ground, which will be very important in the derby. He gets around, he tackles, he can progress the ball as well. Granit Xhaka, probably the signing of the season in the Premier League so far. He's been talismanic. I've not really known a player make such an impact after 14-odd games at a club. He's sort of been transformative, really. So, huge boost to have him back. He's I call him the conductor. He marshals everybody around him. He gets everybody into position. Particularly Siddiqui. Siddiqui can sometimes, because of his engine, can maybe go wandering at times, and he goes to press and he goes to push the opposition. And Granit Xhaka is very good at just beckoning him back over, getting him back into position if he's too far away from him. So I think that's hugely important. Luke O'Nien's red, unfortunate for him, but I don't think he would have played in the derby, to be honest. He might have been an option on the bench. He may have been utilised very late on if Sunderland were protecting a lead or a draw or something like that, but that's all if, buts and maybes. I don't see that one as a particularly keenly felt blow. The other bit of team news would be that Habib Diarra, Sunderland's record £30 million signing, he's probably going to miss the derby. He hasn't returned from his groin surgery just yet. He had mentioned actually to Sunderland fans that he was aiming for that derby game, but Lebris said after the Man City game that's looking unlikely. Reinildo Mandava, the left back, he missed out against Manchester City with a little bit of an issue. He's expected to be back, hopefully, but that's probably one to watch. So it's Lebris is nearing sort of a fully fit squad, to be honest. There's not too many real serious injury updates. And as you mentioned, Rich, the most important thing I think for Sunderland fans was seeing Xhaka and Siddiqui come through that game against Manchester City without getting booked, because they've been hugely influential in Sunderland's decent start to the season.
Yeah, we'll get on that midfield battle actually ahead of Sunday, just in a little short while, because that's going to be a key part of where the game will be won, lost, I suspect. Shame for Luke O'Nien. Obviously had a big week, didn't he, with his Premier League debut against Liverpool, but he'll now miss those games. But probably more importantly, the couple of games afterwards when several of Sunderland's players head to the AFCON. And there's a chance he might have had a bit more of a feature, wasn't he, over the festive period, but he'll be missing. Newcastle-wise, Dom, where do you sort of see the main areas concerned team news-wise for Newcastle, and obviously the return of Wissett to the team in recent weeks after a long-awaited debut?
Yeah, thankfully no suspensions. Players like Joe Linton, always a walk-in suspension in the Premier League, but fortunately he's kept his discipline under wraps in the Premier League. At least he is one booking away from a suspension in the Champions League, but thankfully those don't carry over. So he'll be available, you'd expect. No other players in danger of suspension or will be suspended. Nick Pope, obviously the goalkeeping argument has been a big talking point around Newcastle the past few weeks. He will miss the game. Aaron Ramsdale set to keep his place in the side. Fullbacks, big position really for Newcastle. You've seen the last 4 games how the side have improved with Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall coming back into the side. Just keeping them fit is going to be so important, particularly when Kieran Trippier's out and Emil Kraft's out. So they've got a lack of options at fullback as well heading into these upcoming games. Sven Botman, probably touch and go for the derby at best. He's been out for the past few games with a back injury and is having had an injection on his back last week, which Eddie Howe said would take a week to take effect. So does it make him touch and go for the derby? Potentially, but was he ever going to come back into the side straight away anyway? probably not. Absolute best case scenario for him would be for the Sunderland game, maybe on the bench, but probably, if I'm guessing, I'd probably say he may miss that game as well. And you're looking at the Fulham game in the Carabao Cup quarter-final after that, where he's looking at. Other than that, Will Asula's been out, but again, is he ever going to start a game? He's only ever started one Premier League game for Newcastle. And the boost of Johan Wissa coming back into the side and getting on the pitch for the first time for Newcastle on Saturday against Burnley was a big boost. So that's another option for Eddie Howe. He's not ready to start games. He's been out for 3 months, but certainly a lively option to potentially come off the bench.
Sunderland have the benefit, excuse me, of obviously a free weekend at the derby, which would be massive in terms of everything, rest, preparation. Newcastle-wise, they're very different, isn't it, Don, with a midweek trip to Leverkusen in the Champions League. How do you sort of see that in terms of how Eddie Howe will face that game? Do you think he'll obviously just play strongest 11 again on Wednesday, or do you think he'll have one eye on Sunday and think, I might keep him back for the derby?
Yeah, well, he made 6 changes against Burnley and was able to. I mean, it's probably the most comfortable game that they almost drew ever against Burnley on Saturday. They were absolutely cruising for 90 minutes and then collapsed with about 3 minutes left to play in stoppage time. Fortunately, got the win despite naming what most would agree was an understrength side. So, bit of rotation again for Leverkusen. They've bought themselves a bit of breathing room in the Champions League with the 3 wins they've got already. Realistically, another point, another win would guarantee progress to the knockout stages. It's whether they're setting ambitions a little bit higher and looking to get that top 8 finish. We'll wait and see. I think Eddie Howe's probably put himself in a position where he can make more rotations for the Leverkusen game and then go full strength for the Sunderland game. But then also you're looking ahead to the Fulham game, which is also very, very important in terms of the Carabao Cup quarter-final, a tournament competition that really want to do well in and try and win again. So the Sunderland game falls at a slightly awkward time for Newcastle in terms of team selection and rotating the side. But one thing Newcastle have shown this season, particularly evident at what I'd say a couple of weeks ago, the last away game, where significant rotation was made and they were able to put in arguably the performance of the season. So I'd say whatever team Newcastle name, however many changes they make, they'll be a competitive side regardless of the game.
Yeah, and the adrenaline and high passion of the occasion will get everyone through, I'm sure. Midfield-wise then, you've alluded to it, James, how strong Sunderland's midfield's been this season. Xhaka in particular, bonus to have him available obviously for Sunday. How do you see that midfield battle against Newcastle, sort of Bruno, Joe Linton, Tonali, which is arguably one of the strongest trios in the Premier League as well?
Yeah, I think it'll be just that. I think it'll be a really intense battle. I think to give Newcastle United's midfields the flowers, I think they're excellent physically. Joe Linton, Bruno, Tonali, it's really, really strong. And I think, Xhaka's got the experience. Siddiqui is the engine room, and you've got Enzo Lefebvre potentially playing in the 10 a little bit further forward, who has got flair. But I think the big question will revolve around physicality and which of those midfields can get the upper hand. You have to say, if it's refereed in a certain way, you would probably give that advantage to Newcastle United, just in terms of the size of Siddiqui and Lefebvre. I think it would be whether Sunderland's midfield 3 could outwork Newcastle's midfield 3, and of course there'll be battles all over the pitch as well. But I think the game will be won and lost in midfield, and it'll be a big test for Siddiqui, because we've all ranted and raved about him this season. He's been excellent, to be fair. He's been compared to N'Golo Kante. He is tremendous, but I think this will be a different type of test for him today. And Sunderland will need to get on the ball, they'll need to keep the ball, they'll need to keep the pressure off. So it's a big challenge. But when you've got Granit Xhaka in there, he's been there, he's seen it, he's done it all before, he's got that experience. Not saying Newcastle's lads haven't, because they absolutely have as well. But Xhaka's such a top-level operator, and he's so classy and he calm in the way that he does things. I think that gives Sunderland a little bit of an advantage in there. So I think it's fascinating, really. It's a really interesting facet to the game, and I'm very interested to see how it goes.
How do you see the midfield battle, Dom? And do you think Eddie Howe will have particular plans for Xhaka in terms of trying to restrict his influence in that middle of the park, or do you think he'll just trust his 3 to go and dominate, or try and dominate?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how Eddie Howe will line up, because Joe Linton feels like tailor-made for a derby, but ultimately he's had quite a poor season, whereas Bruno is probably having his best season. You saw his corner goal at the weekend. He's scored 5 goals already this season, albeit all of them coming at St James's Park. He's been a real talisman for Newcastle this season. Sandro Tonali, the last 12 months, has been unplayable sometimes. So those are two of the best midfielders in the Premier League, in my opinion. It's who that third man is going to be. Is it going to be Joe Linton? Or is it going to be a Lewis Miley, who's come into the side and done very well recently, also a local lad? So there's that factor as well. But at 19, is a derby game at the stadium like, okay, he played one at 17, but very much, I'm sure we'll all agree, two different games entirely, really. And the clubs, it's much more of an even playing field this time around. So I'd say Eddie Howe will trust his midfield to do a job. It depends on, obviously, the Champions League game in midweek. Sandro Tonali's had his fitness issues. He hasn't been starting games recently, so is that another facet to consider in potential rotation there? I'm not sure, but if Newcastle want to pick up the second away win of the season, pick up a win against Sunderland, they're going to have to probably name a fairly full strength midfield, which realistically will be the Joe Linton, Bruno Tonali trio we talked about, and you trust them if they all turn up to do the job.
Yeah, it's going to be some battle there. Excuse me. As mentioned at the start of the pod, obviously Sunderland and James have several players, don't they? 7, I think, going to the AFCON. All the players confirmed that they'll be leaving after Sunday, so that was a major boost for Reggie Labrie and his side. Just moving away from the derby slightly, how do you think that's going to impact Sunderland over the coming weeks? And given that it's potentially going to be their last appearance for 2-3 weeks, depending on how their respective countries get on, it's a real great game to go out on, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is a blow. There's no disguising it. I think we've potentially been a little bit guilty as fans in the media generally of over-egging it slightly. I think of those 7 players, you're usually only going to get about 3 or 4 starting at once. Obviously, Ronaldo Mandava's going to go. That's a little bit of it's a big blow. Habib Diarra might go. He might not because of his injury, but he's only played twice. So despite him coming in for a lot of money in the summer, we haven't really missed him. Noah Siddiqui, I think, is the big one in centre midfield. I've spoken a little bit about him already. But Sunderland have been boosted on the wings by the return to fitness of Romain Mundle, Simon Adingra. He's going to go. He hasn't played too much. Arthur Masuaku's going to go. He hasn't played too much either. He's a left back. You've got Dennis Serkin coming back in. He's been playing for the under-21. So, I mean, it obviously will have an effect. How well Sunderland can negate it remains to be seen. Whether some of these fringe players can step up to the Premier League remains to be seen. There are some questions, but it's not I don't believe it's the big hammer blow that everybody sort of thinks it's going to be. It's not like Sunderland are having 7 first-team starters lifted out of their start 11. You're still going to have Robin Roofs. Miquela is still going to be there. Ballard's going to be there. Alderete is going to be there. You know, these have been big players for Sunderland this season. The strikers, Broby and Isidore, are still going to be there. Enzo Lafay is still going to be there. Granit Xhaka, massive. He's still going to be there. I guess the issue would come if, you know, suspensions and injuries start to pick up over AFCON. And I think as well with AFCON, you know, not all of those 7 players are going to play the whole tournament. Teams get knocked out in the group stage. Teams get knocked out in the knockout stages. That's just how it goes. So we will be boosted by some returns earlier than others. How that goes, really hard to predict. So, as I say, just to recap, obviously it will have some sort of an impact, but how big that impact is, I think remains to be seen. It will probably be a bit less than we all thought at the start of the season, just because of how things have worked out.
Yeah, for sure. No such issues for Newcastle. Dom, I don't think there's anyone is heading to the AFCON for Newcastle this winter. More generally about Newcastle, how do you assess the season so far? Obviously, the Premier League, just casting a quick glance at it then, it's so tightly congested that whilst Newcastle might be not quite where they want to be in terms of position, they are only 3 or 4 points off the top 4, and they're also battling on a lot of fronts, as you mentioned, with the Champions League and the Carabao Cup as well. How do you assess Newcastle's sort of start to the season? Albeit
it's been a really strange. Sorry, it's been a really strange start because I think in the Premier League they've left a lot of points out there, a lot of late goals conceded, a lot of frustration really. Yet in the cups, generally speaking, the Champions League, they've got one foot in the next round, you'd like to think, and reaching the Carabao Cup quarter-final for the fourth successive season. It's positive in that respect, but ultimately in the Premier League, it's been a bit up and down. They've found a bit of form since the November international break, 10 points from the last 12, but they've left themselves, as they did last season, with a lot of catching up to do. What I will say is they are in a better position after 15 games than they were last season, and they ended up obviously winning the Carabao Cup, finishing fifth, qualifying for the Champions League. But what happened around this time last season is they won 9 games in a row, an unprecedented run. Can Newcastle go on something like that again? Because that's what's going to be required for them to really get in and around where they want to be. But as you say, it is such a tight league where a couple of wins, a few wins in a row can put yourselves in a very favourable position, considering just how tight it is.
Sunderland obviously had a barnstorm on the start of the season and have had, but there's now just a point ahead of Newcastle. James, just playing devil's advocate. Last week, prior to the City game, felt positive, obviously, with a really important win over Bournemouth. Good point away at Liverpool. Although the way Liverpool are playing this season, maybe that was what you'd expect. And then obviously, a fairly chastising afternoon at City, but that's to be expected as well. Generally speaking, over the last 5 or 6 games, how do you just kind of assess Sunderland's form? And this feels like a big game for quite a number of reasons.
Yeah, I think Sunderland have done as well as you could have expected. Obviously, the headline is that it's only 1 win in, I think, 5 games at the moment. But if you'd have offered Sunderland fans 4 points from Man City, Liverpool and Bournemouth, they would have absolutely taken that. It is a very, very tight division. When Sunderland played Aston Villa at the Stadium of Light, Aston Villa were struggling. Sunderland managed to get a draw with 10 men coming from behind. Aston Villa are now third on 30 points. They've had an exceptional run. So Dom's right. If you can put a couple of wins together, you can fly up the table. But just on Sunderland's start of the season, generally, I think it's been beyond what anybody would have expected. I mean, to take points off Liverpool, to win against Chelsea, we've taken points off Aston Villa, beaten the likes of, West Ham, got a point away at Crystal Palace, which was really impressive. Beaten Bournemouth, beaten Brentford. I could go on. So we've only lost 4 times in the league this season. And the 3 times previous to Man City, we've bounced back with a win as well. So I don't think you can really fault the team to be sitting, I think 15 games in with 23 points. It's given Sunderland a real good foothold in the league, and heading into the second part of the season now, a real good chance of avoiding relegation, which I think is still the aim in the minds of most Sunderland fans. They are quite a way off those relegation places now. I think it's 10 points between Sunderland and West Ham, which is all anybody's really, really looking at. But I think the caveat with the Premier League is that, especially over the winter period, there are so many games and they throw up so many different results that you could find yourself shooting up or falling down quite quickly either way, just because of the volume of the games. And it's a mad Premier League season because everybody seems to be beating everybody at the moment. There's been a lot of unexpected results. But as a Sunderland fan, as somebody covering the club, I don't think you can grumble at all with the start Sunderland's have made, and even the form over the last sort of 5 games. There's still a 2-2 draw in there with Arsenal, Premier League leaders at the Stadium of Light. We got a point against Everton at home as well. So whilst we're not winning games all of the time, we're still picking up points here and there, and to go away to Liverpool at Anfield and get a point despite their bad form, given the money they've spent and everything else. And they've still beaten Real Madrid this season. I know they're in bad form, but they're still dangerous, and we managed to go there as a newly promoted side and negate that and get a point. So I think it's very positive at the moment if you're a Sunderland fan. But the caveat to that is if you lose 3 or 4 on the spin, including the derby, it can all quickly turn carded.
Yeah, 13 more points to be safe. We could be safe by January, but if only.
Yeah, hope so.
What's the mood like, Dom, amongst the Newcastle fans, would you say, and heading into the derby in particular? As you say, the last time the 2 sides met in the FA Cup a couple of years back, was it even that long ago? It was, teams in very different places, but it does feel a lot more even, doesn't it, heading into this game? Is there a nervousness amongst the Newcastle fans?
I wouldn't say a nervousness. It's just nice that we're going into a derby. I wouldn't say on an even playing field as such, but it's not a relegation 6-point anymore. James is saying how Sunderland have that gap, that breathing room ahead of the relegation zone, whereas previously it's been two rubbish teams going against each other, one good team, one bad team. It's two decent Premier League teams going against each other this time. So in that respect, it's from a neutral perspective or football purist perspective, it's a very, very good thing. I think the Newcastle fans are looking at this week as a very important week. You go in, Eddie Howe maybe a month ago was under a bit of pressure, certainly after that Brentford defeat, and everyone looking at these games where you've got Bayer Leverkusen, a game where you possibly need to win to get through in the Champions League. Then you've got a Sunderland derby game where ultimately defeats against Sunderland have completely ruined the reputations of previous Newcastle managers. So that's another big game. And then Fulham in the Carabao Cup. So in the space of 7 games, there's 3 really, really important games. So I think that's what people are looking at, Newcastle fans. Obviously, it's impossible to choose which one you'd rather win. But I know from a fan perspective, the Newcastle fans, certainly of a certain generation, will be looking at that derby game going, that's the must win. Even though a pragmatist like Eddie Howe is probably going, well, ideally we'll win all 3, but maybe even that Fulham game, that's the must win game of the 3.
Where do you see the pressure, James? I mean, obviously, there's a standalone game. It's very different to derby. I get that. But in terms of, where is the pressure on Sunday? Sunderland have had such a good start to the season, but obviously Sunderland at home, huge crowd, a lot of development going on in Sunderland, City on the up. Need that feel-good factor to carry on. Where do you see? How do you see things amongst the fans?
It's a really interesting question. I would lean towards Newcastle just because of the length of time they've been in the Premier League, what they've achieved recently, the fact that Dom says it is a pivotal week upcoming for them. But I think there's pressure all over on a derby game. Sunderland are at home. They've had a good start of the season. The last time we faced Newcastle United in a derby, it was a terrible state of affairs at the club. The club was a bit of a laughingstock, the noise around that game. I don't have to go into details. So there's perhaps a little bit of pressure, probably not on the players or Lebris's mind at all, but within the fan base to maybe right that wrong. But I don't think this game necessarily defines Sunderland's season like it could have earlier on after promotion. So I think there is that as well. Yeah, I think I would have to lean towards Newcastle. I think they're the bigger power, obviously, over the past sort of 5 or 6 years. I think the expectation will likely be on them. But I think pressure comes in different ways. I think the main pressure on Newcastle comes from obviously having sort of 3 games in 7-8 days. I think that's pressure on the squad. I know we'll probably come to it. Newcastle have a big squad with a lot of talent in there, as evidenced by the fact that they could rotate heavily against Burnley. But I just wonder if those big games coming up psychologically, they may rise to the occasion, absolutely. But I think that's more where the pressure is, sort of physically, mentally, rather than from either fan base. Obviously, both fan bases will be desperate to win. But Dom made a good point. It doesn't feel like it felt like it would be a disaster if Sunderland had lost any of those 6s in a row because of the pressure on relegation. They were so tense and so cagey at times, and there was so much riding on them. But now I think both teams are probably, for now anyway, hopefully in Sunderland's case, looking upwards or into mid-table, with the caveat that can change over Christmas, obviously. So yeah, I've probably fudged that answer a little bit. There's pressure all over, is what I'm saying, Rich. But I think Newcastle are under a little bit more, because I do think as well that they've played well in the Premier League this season. But a neutral might have expected them to do a little bit better in the league this season. Obviously, that they've picked up now, and they're very close to Sunderland. But I think that's probably what people will be looking at.
I'd forgotten about that little gem of redecorating the bar. Feels like a different club and a different world ago, but we'll leave that in the past, eh? We'll get on. We'll finish on kind of Reggie Lebrevi, Eddie Howe, in terms of how the two set up tactically and how well Reggie's done this season and the challenges facing both managers. But just a couple of quick ones. Excuse me. Do we agree that the midfield will be the kind of key area where the game will be won and lost? And who do you think the key players are aside from Zach, who we've talked a fair bit about? Dom, I'll start with you. Do you see that as the key battlefield, or is there another area that Newcastle can target?
I'd highlight another area, because I think Newcastle spoke last season about what transformed the season, and it ended up being Sandro Tonali dropping into that number 6 role. This season, albeit it has only been 4 games, it's far too early to start saying it's a change that has transformed Newcastle season, but has seen them play a lot better these last 4 games, has been Lewis Hall, Tino Livramento coming back into the side. Newcastle's identity returns with those 2 fullbacks playing proper fullbacks, attacking the get forward, full of energy. In Lewis Hall's case, I think Lewis Hall in many ways is Newcastle's most important player, so keeping him fit. And I think Sunderland are so compact, so solid, playing through them, trying to go through the middle probably isn't going to give Newcastle much joy. It's out wide where they might get a bit more joy, and particularly with Anthony Gordon coming into a bit of form, Harvey Barnes in a decent vein of form as well, scoring goals. And then on the right-hand side, whether he goes with Jacob Murphy, he could go with Harvey Barnes, Anthony Gordon, or even Anthony Elanga as well. The pace, the directness could really help Newcastle if that's an area. So I'd say while the midfield battle is important, I'm looking out wide, and the fullbacks that have really helped Newcastle these last few games been an equally important, if not more important, battle if Newcastle want to sort of go on this run of games and continue this positive form they've been in the past 4 games.
James, how do you see it from a Sunderland point of view?
Yeah, there's a couple of things to add to that. I think Newcastle have excellent wide options, like playing against Anthony Gordon and Elanga. I mean, I wouldn't say it terrifies me, but I think that's an area where Newcastle are particularly strong. That's not a knock against our fullbacks at all. If it's Ronaldo and Mukwele, I think that'll be a really, really good matchup and a really good battle. But there's no doubt that Newcastle have pace in those wide areas, and pace wins games in the Premier League at times. Sunderland probably will try and sit in, but they're 2 quality players. The other area of the game in which I would add to would be Voltemada and Byrne are so big, so tall, so talented that I'd be interested to see if Sunderland can impose their will on Newcastle United in terms of the set piece. I think that's going to be a big battleground. We've seen it come to fruition in the Premier League, haven't we? Sunderland have been excellent long throws, corners, but will they be able to do that against Newcastle? That remains to be seen. Conversely, will Newcastle be able to stick it on Sunderland with some of the taller lads at corners? So I'm identifying that as a key battleground. I think every corner, as it always is in a derby, or every long throw is going to be, so important in terms of the anticipation of the fans and all of that sort of stuff. But with the big lads in there as well, and given how well Sunderland have approached set pieces this season, I'm very, very interested to see how it will go. And it is Dan Byrne likely to start in defence then, Dom, you think, with Hall coming back to left back?
I'd say so, yes. Although he hasn't been brilliant the last few games, but with Sven Botman not there, Dan Byrne I'd probably back to be the left centre-back with Malik Chow. But you raise a good point on the set pieces, because Newcastle, while they've been quite good at attacking set pieces, they've been quite poor at defending set pieces. You just look at the Arsenal game, they conceded 2 late on. Burnley, the penalty came about from that, Spurs did. So defending set pieces has been a real sticking point for Newcastle this season, and as you say, that's been a strength for Sunderland. I think the loss of Nick Pope, as much as Aaron Ramsdale brings quality in terms of his distribution, and he's still a good shot stopper, but he's not the biggest. And if you put the ball on him, that's a potential area where you can take advantage. So set pieces, conceding any sort of set piece, there'll be an element of nerves and tension from Newcastle, given the set pieces they've conceded this season already.
And I think from a Sunderland perspective, I'd far rather see Dan Byrne at left back. I just would. I think either Traore or Talby might be able to get at him, but if he's moving into the centre, I think that's a bigger problem for Sunderland's forward line. And of course, one of the big questions is, will it be Isidore or Broby? Broby's a little bit more physical. Byrne probably be able to handle him a little bit better. But Wilson Isidore has the pace. Could he get round Byrne? It's all up in the air. There's a lot of questions. But I think, as a Sunderland fan, seeing Lewis Hall line up at left back, I think you're a bit gutted, because he's been very, very good.
Good stuff. I hope Reggie and Eddie are listening to this insight. Loads of areas to tackle. Talking then about the 2 managers, head coaches. How impressed have you been, James, generally with Reggie Labrie since he took charge of Sunderland, and how do you see him stacking up in terms of tactical awareness, etc. in the Premier League. And obviously over the weekend, there was already some reports of other clubs keeping an eye on him, which, you'd expect. You'd be surprised if there weren't. But how impressed have you been, and how do you see the tactical battle ahead of Sunday?
I think he's been a breath of fresh air. To go back to his appointment, he came in without a huge reputation, but what was most impressive is that he adapted to life so quickly in England. We know how tough the Championship could be, but he was the ultimate pragmatist, and I really, really appreciated that in a season where Russell Martin was at Southampton, refused to change, and they went down with a really poor points total in the Premier League. Regis de Vries is sort of the opposite of that. It'll be horses for courses. He's a football geek. He's a football nerd. He absolutely loves it, and I mean that in the best possible sense. He's very studious, tactically very, very switched on, very smart. He can get it wrong, as all managers can, but I think the way he's adapted, firstly, to life in England, to be pragmatic, just general decisions like identifying Eliza Mayenda, keeping Tommy Watson in the fray after he'd agreed to join Brighton, having a sort of mini 6-game pre-season when Sunderland knew they weren't going to get promoted automatically, which didn't go down too well at the time, but worked out in the end. Big calls like bringing Dan Ballard back in for the playoff campaign. He's made some really, really serious shouts as Sunderland manager, and tactically he's adapted to life in the Premier League really, really well. He's pitted his wits against some good managers and come away with results. So I think it's a very, very interesting tactical battle. Sunderland's formation, it keeps changing. We've played 5-4-1, we've played 4-3-3, we've played like 4-4-1-1 recently. I think we'll go back to a sort of variation of a 4 at the back against Newcastle would be my guess. That might be sort of a 4-3-3 in possession, 4-4-1-1 out of possession. But interested to see how that works against Eddie Howe's Newcastle, because Eddie Howe really, I would say, has been England's premier tactician in terms of a homegrown manager over the past 5-10 years. I think his achievements at Bournemouth are often overlooked. To get them from where he did to where he left them. I know that they got relegated again, but to then come again at Newcastle, I think he's probably the brightest English coach of this generation. So it's a fascinating battle, to be honest, and one I wouldn't like to predict.
Yeah, just same to you, really, Dom. Just finally, Eddie Howe, obviously, his position in terms of Newcastle and his legacy is probably already sorted after the cup win, but he'll be relishing Sunday in the tactical battle.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. I think these are the type of games as a manager you want to be involved in and sort of go up against your fiercest rivals as such. I think James makes a good point on Reggie Lebris, and I think that Eddie Howe's similar. He is a football nerd. He loves the game. The way he sets teams up. What I will say, and it's a difference I've seen this season between the two managers, and I think Lebris needs probably a bigger body of work before we're mentioning him in the same sentence as Eddie Howe in terms of achievements. But I think what Sunderland have shown is an ability to make tactical tweaks and get back into games, and that has been a problem for Newcastle. Every time they've conceded the first goal, they've went on to lose the game this season. So that's a problem. Even when they've scored the first goal, they've dropped more points from winning positions than most other sides in the Premier League, if not all. So that's been a frustration with Eddie Howe, with his side this season. Can they put that right second half of the season? That's going to be the difference between finishing in and around where they are or getting in the European places again. So yeah, Eddie Howe, I think most Newcastle fans are extremely grateful and speak of him very highly for the job he's done. But I'd be sort of ignoring the elephant in the room if I wasn't to mention the sort of frustrations that there is with the team and with the manager so far this season. And these aren't new problems as such. They go back probably 2 seasons ago, where finished 7th when they played Sunderland in the FA Cup. Back then, they were dropping points left, right and centre. They were unable to make those tactical tweaks. Okay, injuries played a big part. They've got a bigger squad now. They're a better team now. It's just, can Eddie Howe utilise his squad, make those changes in game, because he can set a team up brilliantly to win a game, but it's when things go that little bit wrong, can he make those tweaks, which can happen in a derby. We've seen red cards in the past. We've seen decisions go against you. Can you make those tweaks to actually get your team back in games and winning them? And that's what we want to see from Eddie Howe from a Newcastle perspective this season.
It's interesting that actually, because Sunderland have won 12 points from losing positions because of those tactical adjustments from Regis Lebris. That probably means we're in for a boring 0-0 draw.
Good stuff. Excellent. Thank you both very much for your time, for your insight, for your expertise. It's going to be a very fascinating week and nail-biting Sunday afternoon for all concerned. Maybe we should do this next Monday after the game. When one of you will be desponding.
If Sunderland win, I'm well up for it.
I think I'm on holiday, Rich. Very nice to allow me to either celebrate or drown my sorrows. So, thank you.
Head to the Sunderland Echo website, Shields Gazette website if you're a Newcastle fan throughout the week for all the build-up. You'll be fully aware of all of our socials, WhatsApp channel and newsletter as well. And we'll have all the latest team news and all the build-up across all of our sites. Thank you both, and we'll see you next time.